Discover the amazing truth, how one name at the wedding transformed perceptions of a black man. Marcus Johnson stood in the shadow of the grand oak tree, fingers fidgeting with the fabric of his blazer. He could hear the laughter drifting from the pristine tent where the wedding was unfolding, its delicate decor glimmering under strings of fairy lights. In this moment, he felt the weight of eyes on him. The quaint town of Maplewood wasn't exactly known for its diversity, and as one of the few black faces in this sea of white, he felt the urgency of their scrutiny, a strange mix of underestimation and expectation pressing against him like an iron shroud. As the aroma of fresh flowers mingled with the rich scent of catered cuisine, Marcus couldn't shake off the tight knot in his stomach. His role as a high school teacher granted him pride, yet this elegant setting towered over him, a stark reminder of how easily he could be dismissed. He'd held too many broken conversations, too many moments where he'd felt like a guest at a party he wasn't invited to. Suddenly laughter erupted, drowning out his racing thoughts, pulling him into the festive atmosphere. Yet every joyous moment came laced with an invisible barrier he was determined to overcome. He spotted Sarah through the crowd, a beacon of familiarity amidst the chaos. Years had transformed her into a stunning wedding planner, and for a moment, childhood memories of racing bikes down sunlit streets flickered in his mind. But just as quickly, he remembered her mother, an influential matriarch whose careful judgments felt as permanent as the oak roots beneath him. Would seemingly warm smiles hide the biases they had been raised with? His mind raced with questions that left him breathless. How would he be perceived tonight? What laughs did they share behind his back? As he mingled with the guests, heartfelt stories of his students leaped from his tongue, tales of resilience and dreams shattered and rebuilt, lessons of community in their stark classrooms. Yet the undertones of a snide remark about people like him cut through his narrative like a jagged edge. Every laughter seemed to echo around him, amplifying his internal conflict. Should he confront, stand tall, or should he remain the meek figure, hoping for acceptance that seemed so momentary? The camaraderie felt elusive as perceptions loomed like storm clouds threatening to break. Before Marcus could continue this wavering dance, an unexpected commotion swept through the tent. The wedding band, struck by sudden chaos, fell silent. Panic flickered across the faces of the guests like a fleeting spark. Without thinking, Marcus stepped forward, a surge of adrenaline rushing through his veins. He called on his inner strength, coordinating, rallying the guests to form impromptu teams for a celebratory mashup of laughter and harmony. The room shifted with his energy. Suddenly he was a leader, a conductor of chaos. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications, so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Yet, as the makeshift band played on, the air around Marcus thickened with unspoken words. The truths began to unravel, and conversations that had previously remained surface level grew deeper. Even Sarah's mother watched him with a peculiar expression, one that seemed to bridge a gap, but hinted at reservations still lurking beneath her skin. Just as Marcus felt a tentative acceptance forming, the innocence of a child's voice, shattering the fragile atmosphere, pierced through the gaiety. Why is he here? The question sliced through the laughter like glass, pulling all eyes back to him. The warmth of connection twisted into a knot of discomfort, an echo of doubt in the crowd. Nervous murmurs washed through the guests, while Marcus felt the weight of their hesitation, his heart gripped by a suffocating anxiety. There he stood, caught between fleeting acceptance and lingering bias, uncertain whether this moment would slip into memory or shape his perceived future. Marcus swallowed hard, the child's question reverberating in his mind, amplifying the insecurities he had struggled to keep at bay. Eyes were on him, penetrating and inquisitive, like lasers shining onto his skin. The laughter that had once felt like an embrace now morphed into an alien sound, echoing his discomfort. He felt the urge to retreat, to dissolve into the shadows of the grand oak, but the sudden surge of adrenaline from earlier pulsed through his veins. This was a moment ripe with potential for both humiliation and growth. Taking a deep breath, Marcus gripped the edge of the table behind him. It was time to reclaim the narrative. Without thinking about the ramifications, he stepped forward, pulling together the threads of courage he had knitted over years of teaching and surviving in environments that often seemed hostile. "What a great question," he exclaimed, forcing a smile that somehow felt both genuine and rehearsed. "I'm here because I believe that love knows no boundaries, just as education shouldn't." He glanced around, measuring the reactions, both supportive nods and hesitant glances, but he pushed through the discomfort. Education is where we create bridges, not just among individuals, but between communities. Silence hung heavy in the air. The weight of his words settled among the guests, and he could feel skepticism whirl as rapidly as curiosity began to grow. This was a chance not only to justify his presence, but also to challenge the assumptions that hung in the atmosphere like thick fog. "Many of my students face challenges that seem insurmountable, but they push through. They learn to overcome not just academic hurdles, but societal biases too." His voice grew stronger with each syllable, transforming anxiety into empowerment. He shared anecdotes about students overcoming obstacles and transforming their narratives, stories that, if told enough, might just chip away at the barriers they faced in their lives. In that moment, Marcus discovered something stirring within him, a hidden reservoir of strength that had ebbed and flowed through years of adversity. Fierce determination took root as he realized that his professional role was not just about teaching. It extended into inspiring others to see the world differently. Then, as if an unseen current shifted, he turned to face Sarah's mother directly. "Mrs. Parker, if I may address what doubt lurks behind your kind smile, I assure you my presence here is not an intrusion. It's an opportunity, a way to contribute to the love and joy that we're celebrating tonight." Whispers fluttered through the crowd, a hesitant mix of appreciation and disbelief. This was his life's work bearing down on him, teaching beyond textbooks, advocating for visibility, demanding recognition. He could sense a strange tension melting slightly as attitudes began to adjust. But moments of clarity are often shadowed by the remnants of doubt. He glanced at the child who had spoken up, felt the piercing scrutiny turning into curiosity. Instead of confrontation, there had been dialogue. Instead of avoidance, he had chosen to engage. Yet just as the atmosphere shifted in his favor, a sudden voice cut through with a sharper edge than before. "What do you know about our community, really?" The words dripped with condescension. Marcus felt the return of that suffocating anxiety, each syllable laced with challenge and defiance, sparking a fierce resolve within him. He realized this wasn't just about one wedding. This was a microcosm of the world he navigated every day, filled with barriers and unexpected dialogues. The stakes were higher than he'd imagined, and the effects of his words rippled far beyond the confines of the tent. But could he hold his ground? Would he choose to tackle not just one question, but an entire system of underestimation? With a deep inhale, he prepared for the confrontation ahead. The moment of truth awaited, and it was finally time for him to face what had been a silent battle too long. The air buzzed with possibilities. Would he rise to the challenge, or would the question of belonging remain unanswered? The crowd remained on edge, and Marcus felt the pivotal nature of this moment, ready to respond and confront at once. Marcus felt the air crackle around him, a charged tension that demanded resolution. The challenge had been issued, an open question not just to his knowledge of the community, but to his worthiness to speak on behalf of those who lived within its confines. It was a challenge he couldn't ignore, nor did he want to. This was the moment he had rehearsed in his mind countless times, where confrontation morphed into opportunity and every doubt became a stepping stone for growth. I know that communities are built not just on proximity, but on understanding. He steadied his voice, letting conviction cloak his words. I may not have grown up here or lived your experiences directly, but I learn from my students every day. I hear their struggles. I share in their triumphs. That connection is not bound by geography. It's rooted in empathy. As he spoke, he felt the crowd shift, the curious eyes reflecting not just doubt now, but the stirrings of acceptance. The young mother beside Sarah's mom leaned in closer, her previous skepticism evolving into genuine interest. Marcus took a measured approach, drawing from a deep well of experiences that he knew would resonate. There's a student in my class, Daniel. He's constantly navigating multiple worlds, his home life filled with challenges that could obscure his potential. But through the work we do together, he's learning to articulate his thoughts, his dreams, his identity. Isn't that what all of us want, to be seen and heard? He paused momentarily, allowing that question to linger in the air. The astonished expressions told him he was moving the needle. Faces that had once reflected caution were beginning to soften, as if Marcus's vulnerability was breaking down invisible barriers. Understanding goes both ways, he continued, adjusting his tone to echo sincerity. I may not have all the answers about your community, but I represent a commitment to learn, to build bridges. I want my students to understand not just their own circumstances, but the beauty and complexities of all communities, including this one. Marcus felt a powerful shift within himself as he accepted that he had the right to stand firm in his beliefs, regardless of the perceptions surrounding him. This wasn't merely about defending his position. It was about sharing a piece of his journey, one that mirrored the struggles and triumphs of the individuals around him. Suddenly, there was a ripple of murmured agreement from the crowd. A voice from the back, a familiar face he recognized, spoke up. You may not be from here, but I see the passion and the heart in what you do. Every student deserves someone who believes in them. Maybe we need more voices like yours in the conversation. Encouraged, Marcus pressed on. Exactly. It's not about being from the same background. It's about walking with each other as we navigate this complex landscape. My fight and your fight are intertwined. It's about solidarity. This last statement hung in the air like a triumphant bell tolling, loudly marking a pivotal moment in the discourse. Marcus could feel a camaraderie starting to blossom, tensions easing and doubts dissipating, replaced with a tentative sense of belonging that he had longed for. Still, a part of him wondered if acceptance could ever be complete, or if there would always be an underlying current of skepticism lurking. The very thought ignited a quiet unease within him. Had he truly made an impact, or merely shifted perceptions temporarily? The silence was pregnant with questions, yet he braced himself for more challenges. But even if you choose to attribute my messages to personal agendas or external motivations, I will continue to advocate for understanding. I will keep pushing for change, because it is essential. Just then, a different voice cut through, small yet potent, drawing everyone's focus back. But what happens next? How do we keep these conversations going when the party's over? Marcus's heart raced. The little girl's inquiry posed a challenge far greater than the facade of genuine engagement. It demanded actual commitment beyond current distractions. He realized the path forward was uncertain, fraught with the risk of reverting to old patterns. Would he be prepared for the hard work of continued advocacy? The dialogue could no longer be reduced to just one evening. It was time for the stakes to rise even higher, and Marcus found himself faced with an unfamiliar but invigorating reality. The tables had turned, and his journey of transformation was only beginning. What would be his next decisive step? Marcus stood at the edge of an emotional precipice, the weight of the little girl's question clinging to him like a shadow. He had navigated a transformative conversation, but that moment was fleeting. The reality loomed that he needed a plan for continuity. Advocacy was not a simple act of rhetoric. It required consistent effort, accountability, and a willingness to face discomfort not only in others, but within himself. What allies would he need? How would he foster the spaces where these conversations could thrive? The urgency of his situation sparked an array of questions that pushed his self-doubt to the forefront once more. He had committed to learning more, but was he truly prepared for the commitment that building understanding would demand? With each passing moment, Marcus's resolve began to crystallize. First, he needed to engage with the voices of the community. He envisioned organizing a small roundtable discussion, a space where stories could be shared freely and everyone could own part of the narrative. Learning would occur, but so would vulnerability, and he was ready to facilitate that. His mind raced as he mulled over practicalities. He would reach out to the local library to propose meetings in a welcoming, neutral ground. They had community rooms available, and books lined their shelves that might inspire deeper conversations. Would the members of the community trust him to lead such sessions? That question haunted him, the familiar spectre of doubt slithering back into his thoughts. "Are you even capable of this?" he muttered to himself under his breath, shaking his head at the unfounded thoughts. He recalled his students' faces, the resilience they exhibited in the face of adversity, and he drew strength from their stories. They were rooting for him. He couldn't falter now. As he made his way home, each step stirred determination within him. He tapped out a message on his phone to a couple of trusted colleagues. "We need to discuss creating spaces where we can keep this dialogue open. Ideas are brewing, but I want your input." For the first time, he felt that the role of educator meant stepping beyond traditional confines, transforming into an advocate, a facilitator, and a learner all at once. His own journey wasn't just about bridging gaps, it was about actively dismantling barriers. There was a deeper meaning behind each interaction, what it meant to connect souls, to not just see individuals, but truly recognize their struggles and stories. Yet lurking in the background was a nagging fear. Who would resist this initiative? What forces would push back against the tide he was hoping to create? The specter of resentment and skepticism could easily overshadow enthusiasm if he misjudged his approach. He could imagine that old lady who had challenged him earlier. What would she say behind closed doors? As he settled into an uneasy sleep that night, ideas swirled in his mind like autumn leaves caught in a breeze, complex, vibrant, and unpredictable. The vision for the round table burned softly, developing into a plan that was enticing, yet formidable. The stakes were raised, and he knew that every move would need to be authentic, guided by his core values. But the struggle felt a mix of exhilaration and tension sweeping over him as he confronted the reality of not just leading a conversation, but waking a community to its potential. The question now was not just about his ability to engage, but how to mobilize and inspire others to join him. With a determined heart, he wondered, would they walk because he was ready to lead? Or would their hesitation prove to be an even bigger challenge than he had anticipated? What would be required to shift their perceptions permanently? Tomorrow promised another round of challenges, and as he closed his eyes, the journey ahead felt both daunting and electrifying. Marcus understood that the real test lay not merely in his motivation, but in instilling a collective will. He was ready to take the first step, but would they follow? Morning light streamed through the curtains, illuminating the uncertainty that lingered within Marcus, like heavy fog. The resolve that had sparked the night before began to flicker under the burden of apprehension. He could still hear the echo of that little girl's question, a reminder of the responsibility he had unwittingly invited into his life. Today marked a pivotal step forward, reaching out to his colleagues. As he prepared to meet them, he couldn't shake the nagging doubt about whether he had the capacity to inspire change. He scoured his closet for something appropriate, weighing each shirt against the significance of the day. Would a blazer communicate authority, or would it draw a barrier between him and the community he intended to reach? Settling on a crisp button-up, he made his way to the familiar coffee shop, an informal setting to ease into a potentially tense conversation. His colleagues arrived, their faces revealing a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He offered a nervous smile, gesturing for them to join him at the corner table. Marcus could feel their expectations pressing down as they settled in, glancing at the notepad where he had written down his ideas. Conversation flowed hesitantly, small talk filling the space before the actual discussion broke through. "All right, Marcus," one colleague prompted. "What's on your mind?" Marcus inhaled deeply, forcing himself to confront his fears head-on. "I want to create a round table for our community, a space for open dialogue about the challenges our students face. I believe our stories can drive understanding and empathy." He kept his gaze steady, reading the expressions in front of him. Interest, perhaps, caution, definitely, but as he outlined his vision, the words spilled forth, fueled by a sense of purpose that buoyed his spirit. He painted vivid images of discussions rich with shared experience, challenging the inherent biases that often went unvoiced. However, he was met with silence. The air resonated with questions unasked, the weight of their hesitations palpable. Finally, his mentor spoke. "That sounds admirable, Marcus, but have you thought about how to get people to actually come? The community isn't always receptive to these kinds of things." His heart sank, but he found himself stepping deeper into the conversation. "That's where we come in. We have to create an environment where vulnerability isn't taboo, where everyone feels heard. I'd even bring in facilitators to build trust." His voice strengthened, but he could sense resistance simmering beneath the surface. Another colleague chimed in. "And what if someone takes that space as an opportunity to challenge you? You know how people can be." Skepticism unwound from their words, wrapping around his own insecurities. The idea that a single misstep could undo the good he was trying to create unsettled him. Yet it was a challenge, not a deterrent. "I'm not seeking to shield myself from adversity. If anything, I want this to be a space where we confront those challenges together." As they deliberated, the discussion shifted to potential narratives that might not align with his vision. The thought of dissent and conflict unnerved him, but he knew they needed to address these fears openly. "It'll be important to listen to those voices, to engage even when it's uncomfortable," he insisted, gripping the edge of his notebook, a tangible reminder of the commitment he had to make. They looked at him with a softened lens, reassessing the idea they had initially dismissed. There was a flicker of curiosity, a path not just to a round table, but to a deeper engagement that could transform perceptions. By the time the meeting wrapped, Marcus had not only shared his passion, but had also steeled himself against the internal and external battles ahead. The flicker of determination ignited into a flame. Each resistant question only fueled his resolve. Yet, as he left the coffee shop, a new worry gnawed at him. How would he face those who might view this initiative with disdain or derision? He knew now, from this moment, there was no turning back. His journey had taken root, but the landscape of doubt and potential conflict lay before him. The time had come to forge a path into the unknown, where he would need to confront skepticism not only in others, but within himself. As he stepped into the street, The weight of his commitment filled the air around him, thick with promise and dread. He couldn't help but wonder, when the time came to present this initiative to the community, would he possess the confidence needed to face those who might challenge him directly? Would he rise to that occasion, or falter at the critical moment? The days that followed were a journey through a complex landscape of thoughts and feelings. Marcus found himself navigating both anticipation and dread as he mentally prepared for the community presentation. The echoes of his colleagues' skepticism haunted him, whispering fears that he might stumble in the face of doubt. Each morning he stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing his lines, but confidence often slipped through his fingers like sand. Work felt different now. The routine meetings and casual conversations no longer absorbed him. He constantly replayed the scenarios in his head. Would people listen? Would they dismiss him? The unsettling feelings began to affect his interactions. When colleagues would ask how he was doing, he found himself replying with a rehearsed smile, masking the turmoil within. One afternoon, while grading papers in a dimly lit classroom, he sketched a peculiar figure in the corner of his notebook, a placeholder for the fears lurking just outside the margins of his consciousness. It was a drawing of himself, standing at a podium with shadows of faces staring him down, a clear visual representation of his growing apprehension. A knock interrupted his thoughts, and his mentor walked in, seemingly perceptive to the tension radiating from him. "Marcus," she said gently, "I noticed you've been preoccupied lately. Is everything all right?" He hesitated, considering whether to unburden his thoughts. The fear of sounding incompetent held him back for a moment, but the sincerity in her eyes nudged him forward. "I guess I'm worried about presenting this initiative. What if I fail to engage with the community? What if they don't believe in what I'm proposing?" His mentor nodded thoughtfully, as if she had sensed his hesitation brewing long before he spoke it. "Every new idea faces resistance, Marcus. It can be daunting, but think of the lives you might impact. How will you navigate that uncertain terrain? You need to decide how you'll respond to criticism and prepare for it." Her words rang clear and immediate, like thunder announcing a coming storm. They planted a seed of contemplation within him. What if each challenge was not a sign of failure but a portal to growth? He realized he had been viewing dissent as an obstacle instead of an opportunity for deeper understanding. Empowered by this revelation, Marcus spent the next several days developing not just his presentation, but himself. He studied public speaking techniques and practiced facing tough questions. Each rehearsal became less about reciting lines and more about embracing the narrative he wanted to convey. He visualized his audience as partners in a conversation, rather than adversaries ready to pounce on his inadequacies. However, self-doubt was a stubborn shadow that loomed whenever he approached the thought of the actual event. Late one evening, after another round of practice, a thought struck him. Those very individuals might share similar doubts and difficult stories. This wasn't just his battle, it was collective. He began to pen his personal story, the fears, the challenges, and the moments of revelation. With a rush of inspiration, he decided to weave his journey into the presentation, making it not merely an exposition of an initiative, but a narrative of shared human experience. He saw the potential for empathy to bridge gaps and spark connection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus looked at the reflection in the glass of his window. He realized he was beginning to emerge from the fog that had once clouded his confidence. This initiative was his pathway to not only engage with others, but to confront his own uncertainties directly. Yet just as he felt a sense of determination solidify within him, doubts surfaced anew. What if sharing his story and vulnerability left him exposed, inviting more scrutiny rather than support? How could he balance the call for honesty with the fear of judgment? That question hung in the air like a dark cloud on an otherwise bright evening. The moment loomed closer, and with it the intensity of the challenge became palpable. Would he navigate the impending storm, or would he falter at the crest of his journey? The morning of the presentation arrived much too soon, as if time had conspired against him. Marcus awoke with an unsettling pit in his stomach, the remnants of unease swirling through his mind like a dense fog. The carefully written notes sat on his coffee table, waiting like an eager audience for their performance. But this morning, he stood not just before a group of people, but a representation of every challenge and insecurity he had faced. After a quick shower, he dressed with precision. Each article of clothing felt like armor, something to shield him from the vulnerability he was about to expose. As he groomed himself in the mirror, he visualized not just the words he would speak, but the emotions he wanted to convey. Would they connect? Would they feel the twining threads of his journey? He arrived early to the venue, wanting to familiarize himself with the space. The sterile fluorescent lights and the echo of hollow footsteps made the room feel even more daunting. He paced slowly, the stillness amplifying his racing thoughts. What if the audience deemed his experiences irrelevant? What if his truth fell flat against their critiques? Finding a corner to position himself, Marcus took deep breaths, focusing intently on centering his mind. He pictured the people he would soon face, imagining them as individuals burdened by their own struggles and insecurities. A sense of camaraderie began to replace some of his anxiety. He was not simply an orator, he was a storyteller, sharing a piece of humanity that might resonate with them. Minutes later, the attendees trickled in, faces a mirror of curiosity mixed with skepticism. He could see the language of doubt across their expressions. Setting his notes aside, he greeted each person with a steady gaze and a genuine smile. As they exchanged pleasantries, Marcus began to shift his mental framework. These were not critics, they were potential allies in understanding. When the time finally came to take the stage, he felt the eyes of the audience bore into him with an intensity that threatened to unravel his resolve. Yet, standing at the podium, he felt a familiar pulse of determination surge within him. This was his moment, a window into shared vulnerabilities. "Thank you for being here today," he began, his voice a blend of steadiness and warmth. "I want to take you through my journey, the fears, the doubts, every single shadow that lingered when I first considered standing here." As he spoke, he poured his heart into his story, the sleepless nights of preparation, the fear of judgment, and the slow realization that his experiences held a significance beyond himself. He unveiled the drawing he had sketched weeks before. Pointing to the illustration of himself at the podium, he shared how that was a representation of his internal struggles, but also a portrait of his resolve to face them. The audience, once skeptics, began to shift. Their body language softened, nods of understanding replaced furrowed brows, and questions morphed from criticism into curiosity. He embraced this exchange, inviting them to participate rather than merely listen. "Isn't it fascinating how we all carry unseen battles?" he asked, letting the question linger in the air. With each story shared and every moment of connection, the atmosphere transformed from one of skepticism to collaboration. But as he felt a surge of support envelop him, a new fear quietly whispered, a fear of rejection, buried deeper than the initial anxiety of judgment. What if this intimate exchange stirred harsh critiques behind closed doors? What if vulnerability invited unwanted attention? Marcus's heart raced as he ventured into previously uncharted territory. Each honest confession of struggle flayed a layer of self-doubt, but it simultaneously revealed an unshakable vulnerability. He knew that exposing his insecurities carried risks, but he also was acutely aware of the powerful connection forming around shared humanity. "Today isn't just about me," he declared, catching his breath and meeting the hopeful eyes of the audience. "I invite all of you to reflect on how your own stories intertwine with courage, fear, and understanding. The moment stood palpable, charged with the raw essence of personal stories battling for voice, yet he felt another challenge looming. The attention of the group shifted, and there it was, hovering just beyond his grasp. The question that haunted him still lingering in the silence. Would everyone continue to embrace their truths after he stepped back from the podium? As he concluded his presentation, the applause erupted, a wave of appreciation washing over him. Yet, within that wave, the currents of uncertainty surged. Would his vulnerability invite deeper connection or further scrutiny? With his heart racing, the realization dawned. This shared exploration was just the beginning. What other truths lay hidden in the shadows, waiting for the courage to emerge? As the applause faded, Marcus descended from the podium, still reeling from the intensity of his experience. The gratitude from the audience felt like a comforting embrace, yet it was interlaced with an unsettling current of anticipation. He made his way through the gathering crowd, each interaction colored by the remnants of his spoken truths. Some approached with tears in their eyes, their vulnerability echoing his own. Others offered congratulations, their words warm yet laced with an undertone of expectation. It wasn't enough for them to simply applaud. They wanted more insight, more connection. Marcus found himself nodding, managing small talk while his mind whirred. In moments like this, he had always felt a natural inclination to retreat. The fear of entitlement hung heavy in the air, an unspoken burden of discomfort that he knew too well. How could he manage this newfound attention? Would he always feel pressured to reciprocate their honesty, to share more and delve deeper into the very fragility that he had just begun to peel back? He spotted Helen, a mentor who had encouraged him to pursue this opportunity. She stood at the edge of the crowd, a beacon of reassurance amidst the uncertainties. He approached her, seeking a grounding presence. "You did beautifully, Marcus," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "But you look troubled." He hesitated, taking a moment to measure his thoughts. "I'm not sure how to continue from here. They want to connect, but I'm not ready to lay bare everything." "Connecting doesn't mean you have to reveal every aspect of your truth," she replied gently. "Your vulnerability can be a choice, a way to foster understanding at your own pace. There's strength in knowing when to guard your heart." Her words resonated deeply. He had shared pieces of himself today, but now another layer lay in front of him, a complex dance of honesty and self-preservation. As conversations swirled around them, Marcus recognized the growing desire to harness this momentum, to further explore not just his fears, but also his passions. What if I used this to inspire others? Not only to share their struggles, but also to pursue their dreams, he mused aloud. There's a power in that. Helen smiled knowingly. Exactly. Consider it a new direction for your personal growth. Transform your fears into courage that uplifts not just you, but also your audience. The idea ignited something within him. This wasn't merely about sharing his struggles, but rather about fostering a platform for collective dreams. How could he cultivate an environment where stories inspired tolerance and ambition? With renewed focus, Marcus glanced around the room. The conversations continued, and he could hear snippets of personal stories being exchanged. He was now a central figure, a lighthouse guiding others toward their own shores of self-exploration. "I think I'm ready to lead workshops," he said, feeling a swell of excitement. "Create dialogues where others can express what holds them back, but also what drives them forward. Help them see the power in their own narratives." Helen beamed, encouraging him. "That sounds like a fantastic idea. You've brought so much authenticity to your speech. Imagine the difference you could make with a structured space for engagement." Each word they exchanged marked a pivotal shift in Marcus's resolve. Instead of recoiling from the scrutiny of vulnerability, he was tapping into it as a dynamic force for growth. The self-doubt that once threatened to mute his voice now transformed into the fuel for something greater. Yet as the conversation progressed, a new fear arose. What if he opened these workshops only to discover that deeper pains lay dormant and unaddressed? Unfamiliar terrain beckoned, and each step toward this new venture carried its own set of risks. "Let's start with a few trial sessions," he suggested, buoyed by ambition but keenly aware of the obstacles. "See how it resonates." As the last of the attendees trickled away, Marcus felt invigorated, yet apprehensive. Would he succeed in fostering a safe space for others, while grappling with his own vulnerabilities? Could he withstand the weight of his aspirations amid the complexities of facilitating such deep conversations? He glanced at the door through which the crowd had exited, contemplating the unknown paths of connection and personal meaning that lay ahead. A new determination flourished within him, yet shadows of doubt danced at the edges of his thoughts, whispering unanswered questions. Would Marcus successfully navigate this uncharted territory where personal achievements mingled with emotional exposure? With every idea crystallizing in his mind, the next step for him beckoned, the challenge of not only inviting others to share their dreams, but also confronting his own. What awaited him in this deeper exploration of self and connection? With the horizon expanding, Marcus felt ready for the challenge, yet fear lingered. The time had come to take yet another leap of faith. Marcus stood in the now empty room, the echoes of the previous evening's conversations swirling around him like an unfinished symphony. With the applause still resonating in his ears, he felt the pull of purpose alongside the weight of uncertainty. The quietness was overwhelming, almost suffocating. He pulled out his notebook, flipping through pages infused with jotted thoughts and sketches of ideas, a landscape of his ambition taking shape. He paused on a blank page, frustration pulling at him. How could he translate this momentum into something tangible? The workshops were an excellent first step, but the thought of confronting potential emotional upheaval chilled his enthusiasm. What if these sessions unearthed more darkness than light? The spectre of his own vulnerabilities loomed just as large as the courage he sought to cultivate in others. With each stroke of the pen, he sketched out ideas for the workshops, considering themes about fear, ambition, and the untold stories nestled within every individual. The thought of guiding others through their respective journeys, of dissecting their fears and aspirations, inspired him, but it also mirrored the very reflections of his own. He grappled with the fear of exposing his struggles beneath the guise of a facilitator, questioning if his insights would resonate or simply echo in the void. He found his mind wandering back to Helen's words, strength in knowing when to guard your heart. What guardrails could he put in place, not just for the attendees, but for himself? He envisioned beginning with lighter topics, establishing rapport and safety before delving deeper into more vulnerable discussions. Perhaps sharing his own story of perseverance could serve as a bridge. But who was he to bear his intricacies when he himself was still navigating treacherous waters? Silencing his self-doubt required redefining his relationship with vulnerability. It wasn't a crutch, but rather a tool, a gateway to deeper understandings. The realization sparked a rush of adrenaline within him. He picked up the pen again, etching a rough outline of the first workshop, embracing fear, using your story as fuel. He leaned back, examining the words, feeling a burgeoning sense of ownership for this venture. The next day, sharpened by his plans, he reached out to potential attendees, friends, acquaintances, even strangers who had lingered in his mind after last night's event. Their varied backgrounds enriched his vision. Each brought distinct interpretations of fear and aspiration, weaving together a diverse tapestry of perspectives. As confirmations trickled in, Marcus felt the thrill of impending connection, yet a darker thought nagged at the corners of his mind. With each person who signed up, the weight of obligation grew. Would they expect him to be the answer to questions he still oscillated between? The duality of teacher and student wrestled within him. Could he genuinely guide others when he often found himself floundering? The first workshop day arrived, and he stood before the group, heart pounding. The atmosphere buzzed with curiosity, but hidden beneath was an undercurrent of anxiety, his own. In that moment, he realized he had to confront his feelings of inadequacy head-on. "Welcome," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm here to share a journey, one that's as uncertain as yours, but together we'll navigate this path." The shift within him was palpable. Instead of positioning himself as the all-knowing source, Marcus opted for authenticity, a collaborative exploration. His openness cultivated immediate trust as people began to share their fears. But then, as stories unfurled one after another, a particularly poignant account resonated with him. A woman spoke of her struggle with rejection that mirrored his own hidden experiences. Their shared vulnerabilities intertwined in a compelling dialogue, sparking an unexpected shift in Marcus's perspective. The workshop transformed into more than a platform for others. It became a crucible for his own growth. He recognized that his shattered pieces could foster beautiful connections. But as he held this newfound understanding, a stirring vision emerged, one that posed a crucial question. What if he could also confront those who challenged his progress, testing his commitment to personal integrity in a space he envisioned? Marcus's resolve deepened as he realized the challenges ahead were just as integral to his development. He could not just inspire, he could also lead. Yet he had to prepare himself for the distance he would have to traverse, not just for others, but for himself. What obstacles awaited him as his workshops gathered momentum and showed promise? What conversations would arise that could challenge not only his teachings, but every core belief he'd clung to? His resolved determination was met with the stirring anticipation of possibility, forging what lay ahead into a shadowy road of discovery and conflict. Marcus stood at the threshold of the community center, the familiar flutter of nervous energy coiling in his stomach. Today marked the culmination of his journey, a culmination not just of his efforts in organizing workshops, but of his personal growth and recognition as a voice of empowerment. The roundtable discussions he had initiated began to take shape, evolving from mere ideas into a lively hub of conversation and understanding. As attendees began to filter in, he felt a reassuring sense of belonging wash over him. This was no longer a task defined by fear. Instead, he stood as a facilitator, armed with the knowledge that vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness. Striking up conversations with participants, he answered questions about the workshop structure, inviting them to share their own stories. Authenticity permeated the air, gently erasing preconceived notions about who held the stage. This morning, Marcus had laid out the groundwork to address not only fear, but also the doubts lingering in the minds of others. Doubts he had felt deeply himself. The first workshop, Embracing Fear, Using Your Story as Fuel, was a space where real connection could thrive. When the event began, the room buzzed with enthusiasm, but Marcus felt the initial hesitation. He took a breath and opened with his own story. How he had confronted biases and insecurities, how he had transformed those moments into lessons and opportunities. He spoke candidly, and for the first time, the transparency of his journey tethered him to the audience in a profound way. "I'm not here to preach," he said, looking around the space, connecting with the faces of those who sat before him. "I'm here to remind each of us that our stories matter, and sometimes the fear that holds us back can also be the light that propels us forward." As participants began to open up, sharing their fears, he could feel the atmosphere shift. The tension lifted, replaced by a potent blend of compassion and camaraderie. The stories resonated deeply, each narrative illuminating shared experiences. A mother, overcoming self-doubt to advocate for her child, a young man navigating the complexities of identity, and an older gentleman reclaiming his passion for art after years of feeling invisible. But then, amid the richness of the discussions, the child's question from the wedding day echoed back in the recesses of his mind. Why is he here? It lurked there, reminding him of the challenge he had faced initially in proving his place. With that in mind, Marcus took a moment to pivot. We all grapple with belonging, he said, but belonging isn't defined by where you come from. It's about the connections we foster now. What binds us is our willingness to share freely and trust one another. As the conversations flowed freely, hands popped up, people eager to contribute their insights. They wanted to know about creating platforms for continued dialogue beyond the walls of the workshop. Here, Marcus felt not just like a facilitator but like a leader, a member of an engaged community and a catalyst for ongoing reflection. "That's an excellent point," he responded, inspired by the input. "Perhaps we can take these discussions into community forums where the conversations can expand. Engaging with local leaders to advocate for change could be pivotal." The room buzzed with excitement as ideas unfurled, and Marcus experienced undeniable validation. He grasped profoundly that his role as an educator transcended the classroom, impacting a broader spectrum of individuals. By the end of the workshop, attendees lingered, deeper discussions erupting organically, conversations where personal revelations led to collaborative ideas for future engagement. In one moment of clarity, he found himself standing in a circle, each participant ready to share, united by a commitment to innovation and understanding. As people began to filter out, he felt a wave of appreciation wash over him. They were marking their own growth, people exchanging numbers, promising to stay connected. That sense of community he had longed for was beginning to materialize. Each connection fueled enthusiasm for continued dialogue. Driven by this newfound empowerment, Marcus embraced the clarity of his trajectory. He saw his own transformation, the awkward man who once stood apart now standing at the center of action, a recognized voice advocating for collective understanding. The culmination of his journey had yielded more than a series of workshops. It crafted his identity. No longer enveloped in self-doubt, he emerged with the solid confidence of knowing his worthiness and contribution. The interactions that scared him before now empowered him. As he tidied the room, smiles and laughter rang in his ears, a chorus of progress. What remained was a promise. This was only the beginning. The relationships forged today would expand, echoing in other unlikely pockets of conversations. In the quiet aftermath of the successful event, he penned down his reflections, each word reflective of the paths he had traversed. The personal challenges he had faced no longer felt like barriers, but bridges leading to impactful dialogues. With the commitment to continual growth in both himself and others firmly rooted in his mind, Marcus recognized that his achievement was not merely a singular victory, but the inception of a ripple effect, a movement toward collective healing and learning. He smiled to himself as he closed the notebook. The moment was ripe for expanding horizons. The doubts that once plagued him had been confronted, and he prepared to embrace whatever lay ahead with open arms. The finality of this narrative wasn't just that he conquered his fears, it was how he transformed them into tools of empowerment for others. Now was the moment to take action. You need to subscribe now to our channel if you haven't already, to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and support content that drives courage and connection. Comment below, sharing your reactions and theories about Marcus's transformational journey. And finally, don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Let's spread the power of personal growth together.